On that decisive day, a new heir adorned the royal palace. His Majesty the King entered the room as soon as the baby was born. He had been waiting curiously to see if his child was a girl or a boy. However, as soon as the tiny baby's figure caught his eye with hair and eyes as black as night, it was considered a sign of a curse upon the land he ruled. Tonight, a boy, shrouded in shadows since his birth. However, unbeknownst to anyone, a fateful encounter was approaching. The first prince of the Kingdom of Louisville, Louisbourg, announced in front of everyone that from now on, he and Charlotte Mersenne were no longer engaged. The noblewoman from Mersenne, standing in front of him with 2 glasses in hand, jumped in surprise. She truly did not know the reason for the end of their engagement. Louis considered it ridiculous, because he couldn't think that she already knew about all the cruelties Charlotte had done to Lucille. The girl whose name was mentioned peeked from behind Louis' back. Lucille was also her classmate, who was born at the same time as them. Charlotte herself truly did not understand what the prince was saying. Seeing her confused expression made Louis even more emotional and consider her just playing around, while informing her that Charlotte had slandered, intimidated, and as if that wasn't enough, she also pushed Lucille down the stairs. Charlotte denied the accusation, but Louis didn't want to hear it, then ordered Filger and Dord to capture her as planned. Charlotte's body was chained so she couldn't move. Even her neck was fitted with a collar, as if she were a criminal. The girl explained that there was a big misunderstanding here. Louis still didn't want to hear it, because he had seen her crimes. As a former fiancé, he admitted he would be merciful to Charlotte and give her a chance to apologize to Lucille. Charlotte refused, especially since she was the one who had been slandered here. Suddenly, a burst of laughter broke the tension. Louis immediately turned with annoyance because his younger brother was laughing at a time like this. Alfred apologized for his rude behavior. It's just that Louis truly met his expectations. He admitted he couldn't hold it back. Whispers from the guests began to be heard as Alfred stepped closer to the source of the spectacle. The child considered cursed, with pitch-black hair and pitch-black eyes. There was no doubt at all that he was Alfred Berg Louisville, the 3rd son of the Kingdom of Louisville. He pointed towards Lucille and said that she was a commoner who didn't know her place. He had to say that the girl always annoyed him. Louis warned that even though Alfred was the 3rd prince, he wouldn't let him get away with his arrogance. The sight made the guests assume that Alfred was the one treating Lucille badly, because he was the cursed prince. There were also those who thought that Alfred was trying to frame Charlotte. They never thought that the kind-hearted Charlotte would do such a thing to a commoner. Charlotte was silent, unable to say a word. Louis said he would never forgive Alfred for daring to do cruel things to Lucille. Alfred said that it was truly unbecoming of his brother, especially since Louis had no proof that he had done anything. Louis assured that Alfred wouldn't get away, because he had just admitted his mistake himself with his earlier words. Alfred asked back if he had really admitted it. In fact, he was just enjoying this development and never admitted any wrongdoing. Louis told him to shut up, because if anyone knew how to hide tracks, it was definitely Alfred. Alfred himself could only smile satisfied hearing it. Louis wasn't wrong about his skill in planning, but it was never needed, because any evidence of the mistakes he made never existed from the beginning. Today's meeting marked the opportunity for his brother, Louis, to enter the 3rd year of high school. If the event was to announce the breaking of his engagement, as a noble, Alfred should have been informed. But he didn't receive such news, meaning it was Louis' personal decision. Seizing the opportunity when their father was away, just to treat the noblewoman as a criminal due to a student quarrel. This was all too absurd. Charlotte finally spoke up, because Louis was clearly not making a rational judgment. If Louis' heart was no longer hers, then she accepted full responsibility and would step aside gracefully. However, this engagement was not just a verbal agreement. This engagement was formalized between the royal family and the ducal family. Without mutual agreement, let alone Louis' personal feelings alone, the engagement could not be dissolved. Louis shouted, telling her to shut up, because he and Lucille had shared a bond of true love. He would kick that old tradition aside. Alfred folded his arms watching, because this was becoming quite problematic. His brother Louis held the highest power when their father was away. Of course, no one could match him, not even the Mersenne family. Charlotte was now truly alone. The only way to resolve this situation was if Alfred took all the blame. That was the role of the villain. He then asked what next step Louis would take, and asked if his brother planned to detain Alfred for unproven crimes. Louis cursed, because it seemed he had to give a little pain to teach Alfred a lesson. He then called the guards to capture him. As the guards approached, Alfred immediately jumped onto the large chandelier above. Lure was flustered. Even though the guards had magic and spears, he asked them to do something. The guards refused because they had honorable guests at this party. If even one person got hurt, it would be a serious problem for the royal family. Lure hissed, unable to argue. Finally, he asked them to secure the balcony and not let Alfred leave this area. Alfred himself just swung silently on the chandelier until his gaze fell on Charlotte, who seemed to have escaped safely. He sighed because the girl might have avoided direct public humiliation. In the midst of his distracted focus, an attack hit the chandelier, and Alfred didn't have time to dodge. He hissed because his hand was burned. Fortunately, his other hand quickly grabbed the railing on the second floor, while the chandelier fell. While climbing the railing, Alfred thought to retreat because Lure had lost his sanity. The ring on his middle finger began to glow. He then bid farewell and wished the best for his brother. A big explosion occurred and Alfred's body was thrown floating in the air. The guards didn't know what to do and waited for orders if they should pursue. However, Lure turned away and told them to stop because he knew where Alfred went. While the other guards were ordered to clean this place and escort the fleeing guests to the front gate. Lucille called Lure worriedly, while the young man was filled with anger towards his brother. Alfred landed on the fortress because it seemed he managed to avoid those guards. The sound of applause then diverted his gaze, followed by a praise sentence from a girl who laughed cheerfully. Alfred really caused a commotion again today. The young man then immediately landed on the ground and approached Machina, who seemed to have been watching since earlier. The girl raised 2 fingers in a peace sign while saying that everything Alfred did was perfect. Alfred looked gallant when acting as the mastermind of evil. The young man himself complained because he felt that wasn't the right way to greet his master. Machina felt she had tried her best to support her lord. Plus, regarding Alfred's escape from that place, she had been waiting here since the day before. Alfred also said that she was a commendable servant. The young man then caught red-handed that Machina just wanted to be lazy. The conversation shifted to news about Charlotte. Machina had assigned guards to watch her, but she hadn't received any news yet, so most likely the noble girl was safe. But still, this was good for Alfred. He had just saved his first love like a true knight in shining armor. However, Machina immediately stopped praising as soon as Alfred hissed while punching the wall. The young man asked how far Machina planned to dig into his past. Machina admitted it didn't take long to get there, when she was engaged to Lure, and Alfred thought he had to let her go. But this was a big change in an event, and Alfred really succeeded. However, tonight's situation wasn't that simple. Machina then asked her lord's plan now, and offered to just take Charlotte for himself. Alfred became annoyed because he kept getting teased, while Machina bid farewell to return to her room and told the young man to sleep too while giggling. Machina quickly left while saying good night, leaving Alfred who sighed and thought about the girl's words. For him, this wasn't like first love. The next morning, the chirping of birds accompanied the shining sun warming the morning. After causing a commotion at the new school year party at the palace, who would have thought Alfred would also damage that place? The young man sitting on the sofa while scratching his head admitted that last night's incident was unavoidable. He spoke with his father through the king's pigeon. The animal was created from magic, where users could communicate long distance through the pigeon. If he didn't take that action, Alfred didn't know what would happen to Charlotte now. Besides, it was a good way to create the impression that Charlotte was framed by the third prince. The bird sighed and felt he had to praise Alfred for saving Charlotte. Anyway, the pigeon then flew towards Alfred and pecked him while questioning the reason for all the nonsense. Evil third prince. And he kept insisting on tarnishing himself. Alfred complained because he felt nothing was wrong. Besides, he would always be the cursed child. It was a bit late for him to start worrying about bad publicity now. Finally, the bird stopped while sighing. He then told Alfred to rejoice, because his father had arranged a match for Alfred. The young man considered this a cruel joke, where the cursed child was given a marriage proposal. However, it was clear that his father was not joking at all about this. The bird admitted he had learned from the recent incident, and Alfred needed to be watched closely. The young man judged his father very cruel for really using state authority for that. The bird didn't understand what his son implied, but for information, he initiated contact with them, and they willingly agreed. Alfred really couldn't fathom it. Machina then interrupted and informed that Alfred's fiancée had arrived. The young man jumped, but the pigeon praised his servant. Makina had known since the beginning. She then turned and invited someone who had been waiting to enter. The one referred to as Alfred's fiancée was none other than Charlotte. His father saw that Alfred was starting to like the girl, making the young man then grip the pigeon and ask its purpose here. The pigeon had to admit Alfred had made the right decision. To shift the false rumor about Charlotte bullying student Lucille to Charlotte was framed by the third prince. That is, hiding it with a new lie. However, Alfred couldn't change the fact that the first prince ended the engagement. Charlotte's situation was already critical. However, it couldn't be denied that Charlotte was someone who would happily be included in the royal lineage. The mistake in handling this problem was in the hands of the royal capital, so it was only right that they take responsibility. Alfred rubbed his head because he didn't know why. Specifically, it had to be him, and possibly in the end his father became cynical towards him. However, the pigeon mentioned 4 main reasons. First, only Alfred was available. Second, to fulfill Charlotte's wish. Third, his father believed she could be Alfred's reign. As for the last reason, the pigeon said it was just a rumor. Makina then raised her hand and apologized for interrupting. Honestly, there was a circulating rumor which showed that Alfred had harbored feelings for Charlotte from the beginning, and he devised a plan to steal his lover from the first prince. At least, that's what the rumor at the academy said. In simple terms, Alfred had stolen his brother's lover. Makina giggled, especially seeing the young man's shocked expression. Alfred really couldn't fathom the reality of who stole whom from whom now. Makina laughed while explaining that Alfred had stolen Charlotte from Lure. That's what people said. Apparently, the rumor could happen because of what had occurred since that party night. Even though Alfred skipped school and locked himself in his room because he didn't want to see Lure, making him think he was also at fault for letting the rumor spread uncontrollably. However, after thinking about it, he suspected that Lure himself spread the rumor. Makina laughed crisply because that guess was spot on. Prince Lure was very angry and said that his brother Alfred, by using Lucille to steal Charlotte for himself. He always acted like that wherever he went. Alfred himself only showed a suffering face while gaping hearing Makina's explanation. The maid admitted her ears almost fell off because of it, making Alfred slump. So that was the crux of the matter. They might also use the rumor to formalize the engagement. Alfred didn't understand why his father agreed with Lure's crazy logic, making him get cursed at, even though his father claimed he also followed his own. They could change the story to Charlotte is the victim, kidnapped by the evil third prince. That would be an easy role for him to play. With the pigeon's words making Alfred feel his father was there. Makina explained that Charlotte would be the oppressed girl. Then people would pity her and stop considering her a criminal. This time, Alfred punched the table because he couldn't stand his father's plan. Somehow his father and Makina could be so relaxed about this. Charlotte would become the fiancée of the cursed child. They wanted to clear Charlotte's name, but her reputation would be even more tarnished, and this wasn't a temporary action to deceive the public. It was a shackle that would bind Charlotte for life. If so, Alfred thought his father should improve his own reputation for the girl's sake. He then cursed because he realized his father had caught him. So this is what he meant by the reign mentioned in the main reasons for his engagement to Charlotte. Damn it, Alfred never asked for anything in this matter. He just played the role given to him. Under normal circumstances, humans are born with 4 magical elements: fire, water, earth, and air. Depending on each individual's talent, they can use several elements, but usually limited to those 4. However, the royal family is a different story. They have a golden power shining from the 5th element, namely ether. This power is what makes the royal family what it is now. However, what was inside Alfred was not ether, but the 6th element, namely Erebos. The same power once used by the night wizard to plunge the world into darkness, which has been a bad omen since ancient times. That's why Alfred isolated himself since childhood. Every time attending noble parties, they avoided Alfred and whispered full of contempt behind his back. That's how his life was. If the king tried to defend Alfred, his reputation would be tarnished. So, he preferred to play the villain. Alfred clenched his fist because he didn't remember ever asking his father to do such a thing. He always said that, making Alfred not hesitate to curse him. The pigeon asked if there was anything else his foolish son wanted to say. Alfred remained silent. The young man then turned to Charlotte and asked if the girl objected. Charlotte admitted that she was the one who wanted to maintain the relationship with the royal family. Charlotte was a special figure for the royal family, even among all the ducal families. One of the reasons was the amount of mana she possessed, but not just that. Her element was known as silver mana. Its nature was very similar to ether, which is the fifth element only possessed by the royal family. Charlotte was not as strong as a noble, but she had unmatched talent. Alfred didn't think there was anyone else more qualified to support the royal family. That's what his father wanted. Once again, Alfred reminded that his brother had publicly ended their engagement not long ago, which might make her worry about men. Makina then reminded him to maintain politeness, because what Alfred did was already excessive. Charlotte clasped her hands and honestly said that she might feel more resistant to the idea if it was with another man, but she had no problem at all if it was Alfred. Seeing the sincere expression with her gentle words made Alfred stunned. The young man remembered now that Charlotte was the only person at the party who didn't care, even though Alfred was the cursed child and approached him. That's why Alfred knew Charlotte trusted him wholeheartedly. Alfred cursed because he couldn't ignore Charlotte. Seeing her lord, who was just silent, Makina whispered calling and reminded that he would only embarrass Charlotte if he ran away now. Alfred told her to shut up, because he already knew. Charlotte herself just stared, not understanding at the two servant and master whispering in front of her. Finally, the young man admitted he was wrong for handling the situation the way he did, then agreed to this business engagement. Charlotte looked happy hearing it, while the pigeons sighed in relief. But Alfred asked them not to misunderstand, because he had no intention of changing his role. He then turned away while saying that being engaged had nothing to do with that, making the gazes of the two girls in the room follow his steps. He stopped at the door threshold before really leaving. He informed that he would continue doing what he had been doing all this time. Silence fell for a few moments after Alfred's departure, until Charlotte, who looked sad, guessed that perhaps Alfred hated her. Makina then laughed and asked her not to worry, then informed that Alfred was not good at expressing himself. According to her, the young man felt 30% worried, 30% confused, and the other 40% happy. Charlotte could judge that Makina seemed to know a lot about Alfred. The maid could only scratch her head while laughing, because she was the one who had served him the longest. Hearing that made Charlotte ask her to tell everything about Alfred. She wanted to know him well. Makina smiled happily because Charlotte came to the right person, because she was a servant who gave everything to serve Alfred, and Charlotte could entrust everything to her. The noble girl was very happy and very grateful. There was a book about a boy who left his small village to defeat the Demon King and become a hero. Maybe it was a cliché story, but Charlotte really appreciated that book. At the age of 7, the little girl hugged her book and glanced here and there at a noble party, until she found Prince Lure, who was then 9 years old. She was very happy. As soon as she approached him, Charlotte immediately thanked him because Lure had sent that picture book. Lure was glad the girl liked it, as was Charlotte. The girl admitted the story was amazing. It would be amazing if she could be friends with the enemy in the end, like in this book. Lure agreed, and there was nothing better than getting along. With that, Charlotte decided when she became queen, she wanted to make everyone in the kingdom live in harmony. Lure hated to say it, but reality didn't work like that. There was nothing wrong with dreaming, but in the end, it was just wishful thinking. A kingdom could never run if its queen had thoughts like that. Charlotte was silent while clutching her book tightly, then agreed with Lure's words. Someone then called Lure, making the child apologize and quickly bid farewell. Charlotte then thought if her dream was nothing more than an aspiration, then this book was the same. She then left her book on one of the tables and ran away, until the book was found by a noble who was taking food. If she wanted to be a worthy queen in this kingdom, Charlotte decided she had to let go of that book. Someone then reminded that the girl had forgotten something, making her steps stop. She then turned with a child trying to interfere in her business, and apparently it was Lure's younger brother. She quickly admitted she didn't need that book. Alfred didn't know what was wrong. Besides, it was a good book. His innocent gaze looked at the book in his hand. Charlotte knew the book was good, and Alfred wasn't a bad child, but she hoped the boy would leave her alone right now. Alfred then questioned why she didn't want the book anymore. The thought that Alfred was like that picture book made her apologize and turn around. She then concluded that it would be difficult to realize the aspirations in that book, because someone who would become queen should leave behind such naivety. Alfred then said that Charlotte was just repeating what Lure said to her. Seeing Charlotte immediately silent and gaping made Alfred realize his guess was correct. He explained that the chances were never zero, but nothing would change if not tried. Seeing Alfred flipping through the book pages, Charlotte remembered that his words were a quote from her favorite character. Alfred closed his book again and said he also liked this book, then returned it to the girl. Then said that the people who make the world a better place are always those who have big visions. There is no word too late to give up after being able to challenge oneself. Alfred said that while walking past her, he would look forward to seeing Charlotte's journey, then waved goodbye, making the girl rethink. Charlotte smiled, remembering her first meeting with Alfred. Makina then called her and informed that they would turn right here. They had changed clothes to disguise and search for Alfred's whereabouts in the middle of the city. Makina herself already knew that Alfred was always here, until her head bumped into someone, making Charlotte immediately ask about her condition. They were suddenly startled because apparently they were caught red-handed by Alfred, who immediately interrogated their presence. Makina still acted calm and said it was just a coincidence. However, Alfred knew they weren't coincidentally strolling in a back alley far from the palace. Charlotte then asked Alfred not to blame Makina, because she was the one who asked the maid to accompany her, although Makina also interfered a little. Alfred then asked for an explanation from Makina. The maid immediately pushed Charlotte forward because she said she wanted to know more about Alfred. So Makina thought they would join in witnessing his brilliant daily life. It would be better for both of them to deepen their understanding of each other now after being engaged. Alfred then said that Charlotte didn't need to do that, just because they were engaged. However, Charlotte felt as his fiancée, it was her responsibility to learn more about Alfred. The young man judged Charlotte always serious as usual. Charlotte immediately explained that she only knew a little about the outside world and felt they might consider her boring, but she promised to improve that aspect of her character. Alfred then immediately flustered, explaining that he didn't mean to say Charlotte was boring and asked for Makina's help. The maid whispered to Charlotte that Alfred was the type who was neat and polite, pure and curvy body. And coincidentally, Charlotte fit that criteria perfectly. Makina meant the girl had a big gift, which was her body. So, she asked Charlotte to be more confident. Alfred cursed and chased her to teach her a lesson for what she had told Charlotte. The noble girl praised them who got along and had known each other for a long time. Makina then said her idea to close the distance between Charlotte and Alfred by changing how they addressed each other, through a nickname. Alfred then complained because Makina came up with a weird idea again, but Charlotte really thought of a suitable nickname. Shyly, she called him Al, and immediately made Alfred freeze. Makina then expressed her other good idea. She offered for Alfred to call Charlotte by the name Char. The young man immediately jumped as if struck by lightning, as if Makina wanted to kill him with those sweet ideas. Charlotte herself liked that nickname, making Makina tease Alfred even more. The young man rejected it outright, then turned his face as if annoyed, though more precisely he felt embarrassed. It was really embarrassing to do that at this time. Charlotte then apologized, then complained that it was a boring suggestion from a boring woman. Makina then warned Alfred not to bully women. The young man then agreed because he was forced. Then he turned his back on the two girls and called Charlotte by the name Chat. The called girl responded very cheerfully. Makina was happy seeing them, but Alfred had to try hard to calm himself because this was not good for his heart. Charlotte asked Alfred's purpose for coming to the city today. The young man admitted there was no clear reason, but Makina informed that Alfred came to buy embarrassing books with women's covers like the book she showed and found in Alfred's room. The maid sighed because she wasn't surprised to see something like a saint and nun in it, but she didn't expect to see a maid appear. Charlotte then hurriedly read the book, making Alfred angry because Makina brought the book here. Alfred snatched the book from Charlotte's hand and forbade her to read trash because it was inappropriate. The noble girl was shocked, but then she called Alfred and said precisely because she was his fiancée, Charlotte felt the need to know Alfred better. Even asked permission to see the book. Alfred yelled because the book was something she didn't need to know. After some time passed, Alfred sat with a limp body. He told Charlotte and Makina to hurry back because their business was done here. Not forgetting, he also asked them to forget everything about the book. Makina asked if Alfred really wanted to buy more lewd books. In his entire life, Alfred admitted he had never wanted to fire Makina like today. The maid still asked the reason Alfred didn't tell them where he was going. Both planned to join whatever happened. Alfred then said he wasn't going to a special place, but rather he was gathering information. A merchant responded to the gossip he was asked about and felt that this must be about Prince Lur's engagement. He thought the third prince was the one to blame as usual. He heard that Alfred kidnapped the Duke's daughter or did other vile things. Alfred laughed and praised the version of himself that the merchant was blaming. Charlotte stared in confusion, while Makina just smiled. As soon as Alfred approached, they pretended to be choosing fruits. The young man had finished with this area. They even gave him apples, so he threw one of his apples to Charlotte, while the girl made sure that the young man had just been gathering information. Alfred admitted he stopped by several shops he often visited to ask them many things, while eating his apple. Like asking if there were any suspicious people lurking around, or how Lur's reputation was among the people. They would obtain more accurate information by asking directly. Charlotte was busy interrogating Alfred while chasing his steps, while Makina rubbed her apple on her clothes before eating it. Alfred's main purpose today was to investigate how society was talking about the broken engagement. He intended to go alone to check it. Meanwhile, Makina taught Charlotte to bite the apple directly, surprising her because she wasn't used to it. The noble girl glowed staring at her apple while imagining they could eat apples without cutting them. Alfred smiled seeing the girl's expression and felt he didn't need to worry about anything. He was glad this could distract Charlotte. Finally, they arrived in front of the Adventurers Guild building. Alfred immediately opened the door. Adventurers traveled everywhere for work, so information tended to gather in places like this. Charlotte was stunned seeing the real guild, just like in her picture book. A receptionist girl named Maisie carrying 4 glasses of drinks then greeted them. She was a bit surprised because Alfred was the type who didn't usually travel with friends. Alfred greeted back and ordered 1 table. Because the guild was very crowded, there was only 1 table left at the very back. Apparently, Kevin and the others had succeeded in completing the dungeon mission, saying that it was good news, then bid farewell and promised to stop by later. Alfred pointed to the quest board in a corner, the spiked mugs, and all the alcohol bottles with different colors. Charlotte kept scanning her gaze with full admiration, because she had only ever seen all this in books. The guild house also functioned as a bar. As soon as they reached their table, Alfred informed that there were other adventurers here celebrating their success. Makina, who had already taken her seat and was holding the menu book, gave the item to Charlotte and invited her to order whatever she wanted. As soon as she read the menu book, Charlotte couldn't believe they could eat meat straight from the bone. There was also herbal salad. She admitted she had only read this menu in stories before. Charlotte was truly amazed and quite liked this one. Alfred whispered to Makina and asked if Charlotte was really here because she wanted to get to know him better. Makina told him not to act silly now, because Charlotte was really doing all that. Makina felt Charlotte might feel sad after her engagement was cancelled, so she thought this would also be a good change of atmosphere for her. She thought this was hard for Alfred to understand considering how dense the young man was, so this very caring maid thought it would help. If Alfred wanted to show his gratitude, Makina asked him not to hesitate to shower her with praise and raise her salary when he did. Alfred confirmed it and was very grateful while bowing respectfully, making Makina freeze with sweat pouring down. The girl didn't know what had just happened. So Alfred explained that Makina always ran around for his sake and supported him by doing all the things he couldn't do. He really appreciated her hard work. Alfred smiled widely because he decided he should be honest with her once in a while. However, Makina turned her face away and ignored the young man, making Alfred question her attitude, even though Makina herself had asked Alfred to praise her. Unfortunately, Makina would only get confused if Alfred said things like that. Now it was Alfred who was confused getting a reaction like that. Charlotte was also confused seeing them. Kevin came greeting and hugged Alfred, whom he hadn't seen in a long time. He then made small talk about the party held because they succeeded in completing the dungeon mission. Kevin then switched to Alfred, who came here with a girl on each arm. He asked permission to borrow one of those flowers. Charlotte immediately apologized for the late introduction, saying she was Alfred's fiancée. However, before clearly mentioning her name, Makina hurriedly covered her mouth. Hearing the name Charl, Kevin guessed that she was like the girl everyone was talking about, making Alfred hurriedly correct him. He said his fiancée's name was Char. Kevin immediately smiled happily to meet her, as did Charlotte. He guessed the hooded girl in front of him must be very down right now. He meant her name was very similar to that noble girl who bullied commoners. They froze hearing that sentence. Kevin then sat down while roughly placing his mug on the table. He just couldn't forgive Charlotte. He admitted he didn't know how important this ducal family was, but judged that they were rotten to the roots for bullying commoners just to vent their anger. Kevin guessed the girl did evil because Prince Lure ended the engagement with her. Charlotte could only bow her head hearing the narration, making Alfred immediately hold her hand. Kevin called the cursed third prince really annoying for wanting Charlotte too. He doubted the kingdom would be fine with that child in the royal family. At least they still had the first Princess Luce, the second Prince Robert, the second Princess Sophie, and the most popular of all, the first Prince Lure. Of course, the people didn't need that vile third prince. Kevin even hoped the third prince and the ducal daughter would just run away and die in a ditch somewhere. Many people would be happy to see them go. However, hearing too many opinions like that, the young man looked scared, but then he laughed, though in his heart regretting letting his emotions take over. He immediately denied and admitted that the gossip Kevin conveyed was different from what he heard. Alfred himself wouldn't feel like this if Kevin was only talking about him, but he even cursed Charlotte too. Besides the third prince, Alfred admitted hearing that the ducal daughter became a victim in all this. Kevin looked unbelieving. Kevin was at the center of the adventurer community. He knew everyone. If there were some unpleasant rumors circulating, then Alfred just needed to counter them with better ones. Alfred continued talking with Kevin and several other important guild members, while spreading favorable rumors wherever he went. The narrative that the ducal daughter never bullied commoners, he dumped all the blame on the third prince, and so on, kept echoing. That should have been the limit of the rounds he did that day. But Charlotte's footsteps felt heavy as they walked home. On the way, Alfred walking ahead didn't comment anything, until Charlotte said the young man hadn't done anything wrong. Alfred then apologized for the incident back then. Now he knew Charlotte came here just to find a new atmosphere, and what he could say was for Charlotte not to let it bother her. The noble girl fell silent while clenching both her hands, then apologized because she couldn't comply with Alfred's request. Charlotte's voice trembled as she said those words. Upon arriving at the palace, Alfred shouted in his room because he had a feeling Charlotte would say that. The girl looked like she was having fun, so Alfred was really off guard. Even though he knew the rumor would be the talk of the whole city, and Charlotte's mood worsened on the way home. Alfred kept squeezing his head while sitting at the work desk, and thinking that maybe he shouldn't meet Charlotte for a while. At the military training ground, the soldiers appeared to be training, but then Alfred was surprised to find Charlotte here. The girl immediately greeted, while Makina silently watched from behind her. Alfred turned his face away, then asked if there was any other better activity besides following him, and shouldn't Charlotte go study, as usual. He then cursed in his heart because his words were harsher than intended. Charlotte jumped. She realized she would skip lessons to become a queen. The atmosphere became awkward, making Charlotte herself unable to continue her sentence. Makina accused Alfred of having no wisdom. Finally, they just sat silently and watched the soldiers training from the terrace, until Charlotte gathered the courage to ask what the young man was doing here. Alfred honestly answered that he was just watching the soldiers train. Even though it didn't improve his skills, he was here to assess his country's military strength with his own eyes. They never knew what might happen on the battlefield. So, understanding the soldiers' strength could affect the chances of victory, especially when the planned strategy failed. For example, Alfred pointed to a soldier there swinging a sword. He was calm and stable when striking. His strikes were accurate, but his reflexes were a bit slow. A slow fighter would have trouble facing fast enemies, while the one next to him was skilled at approaching his enemies, but his attacks were messy and his foot movements made him easy to read. Therefore, his biggest challenge was how easily he could be countered. Charlotte herself couldn't imagine Alfred knowing all the soldiers' stories. The young man admitted he only knew their basic info. Even so, he didn't have everything compared to beginners. Makina then teased Alfred by calling him perverted, making the young man annoyed. Suddenly Lure shouted at Alfred because he finally found him and warned that his younger brother couldn't escape him anymore. Alfred was shocked by Lure's unexpected arrival. Even Charlotte and Makina hid behind a pillar. Alfred could use blinding magic and escape, but it seemed Lure didn't intend to stop until he caught him. Alfred certainly didn't want to deal with this, but he felt he had to face it now. His hands clenched tightly, then asked Makina to take care of Charlotte for him. The maid of course agreed, but was surprised her master would fight Lure. She thought Alfred would disappear in a puff of smoke. The young man didn't respond, but immediately turned when Charlotte called. He then asked her not to worry seeing the anxious gaze, and admitted he was used to dealing with him while waving his hand and leaving. Alfred scratched his head while sighing, then asked what his brother had done. Lure didn't like being called that name, even though he had been warned many times. Alfred confirmed it, then asked what Lure wanted and what was so important that he needed to stop the training. Lure looked very fired up because Alfred's actions the other day were the peak of stupidity and caused the people's trust in the royal family to waver. It was unforgivable if the royal family bullied innocent commoners like Lucille. As fellow nobles, Lure decided he would be the one to shape his brother's behavior. Alfred sighed because Lure was bringing this up again and asked for proof. Lure was very frustrated hearing that casual statement. Alfred still asked for proof regarding him bullying innocent Lucille. If what Lure said was true, the king wouldn't tolerate it and he would definitely be in prison already. Lure didn't want to hear any explanation. He threw a wooden sword and told Alfred to pick it up. Lure threatened that if his brother still pretended to be stupid, he would give this lesson with a real sword. Alfred did pick up the sword, then broke it and said that sounded boring. Lure then brought up Alfred calling himself a man from the heir family. Alfred confirmed that he just didn't want to fight his brother, making Lure even angrier and cursing his brother for thinking he intended to humiliate him. Alfred finally agreed. Because Lure forced it, he decided he would practice with him, but with conditions. Lure had to use that wooden training sword, while he used a real sword. The soldiers called him a coward and shameless, but Lure didn't mind and accepted the condition. They asked Lure not to follow it, because it was too dangerous. Lure asked them not to worry, because this coward wasn't his opponent. Alfred immediately praised his usual noble attitude and asked what would happen if his hand slipped during the fight. Lure admitted he didn't care. The two brothers faced each other in the middle of the training field. Lure immediately attacked, making his brother have to struggle to hold it off. Not enough with that, he kept attacking relentlessly. Many soldiers supported him to defeat Alfred. The young man called the Cursed Child didn't give up holding off the attacks. Charlotte and Makina were also tense watching it. The soldiers smiled happily seeing Alfred cornered and kept trying to defend. Charlotte grew more worried seeing the sword used by her fiancé seemed to have nicks on its blade. Its stitches were already covered in pain, but the blade would break sooner or later. Makina couldn't believe Charlotte could see all that from where they stood. Apparently she had very good eyesight, making the maid gape in amazement. It seemed Alfred was also blocking Lure's attacks with the same part of the sword every time. Charlotte became curious about what her fiancé was planning. Lure exerted all his strength, making Alfred's sword break. Charlotte grew even more anxious. Lure also pushed his brother, making him fall. The soldiers cheered seeing Lure successfully cut steel with a wooden training sword and praised him even more. Charlotte didn't understand how Alfred could lose with weapons. Even so, Alfred insisted he didn't feel the need to apologize because it seemed like what he said before, that his brother had no proof. Seeing his still arrogant brother, Lure then opened his gloves by biting them. If so, he gave another idea. With this, Lure officially challenged Alfred to a duel. In that duel, if Lure won, it would save him from the trouble of chasing his brother and digging up the evidence he was hiding. Alfred would also admit his mistake and apologize publicly together with Charlotte. With terms like that, Alfred felt doubtful he could comply. Alfred revealed the fact that Lure, who was nothing compared to him, remained unchanged. However, Lure emphasized that by refusing the duel, it meant Alfred was hiding something. His brother kept insisting there was no proof, but his attitude itself spoke volumes. Frankly, by accepting this duel, actually Alfred wouldn't gain anything. In fact, he would lose everything. Defeat would automatically consider him guilty, even if innocent. But if he refused, this would only create more suspicion and a truly unreasonable situation. The logic wasn't very reasonable, but acceptable to the crowd of soldiers. Alfred cursed in his heart while clenching his fist because he had been cornered. Finally, he accepted the duel challenge, but he also proposed a condition. If Alfred won, Lure had to release Charlotte from the criminal marking collar she was wearing, because the key was held by his brother. That collar was put on Charlotte, where this item was a restraint intended for criminals, which also functioned as a magical seal. As long as the girl wore it, she couldn't use any magic. Even if temporary, it must be difficult for her, because the power she had honed for so long was sealed like this. This collar had no main key, so using the key Lure had was the only choice to remove it. Now was Alfred's chance to negotiate directly. He provoked him not to refuse, by saying that Lure had something to hide. Thus, Lure agreed to release the collar if his brother won, but he reminded that it didn't mean Alfred had a chance from the start. The duel would be held 2 weeks from now. Until then, Lure told his brother to prepare for what was coming. Charlotte chased Makina's steps in the hallway, questioning why Alfred called his maid and feeling worried about what happened. Makina also admitted she was curious, so she would meet and talk to him directly. Charlotte understood, but before Makina really left, she brought up again the reason Alfred deliberately lost. The young man even tampered with his sword. She just didn't understand what sometimes went on in his head, why Alfred did things like that. Makina then said that this was for Lure, surprising Charlotte. Alfred himself chose to play the role of the cowardly and despicable third prince. By lowering his own position, he elevated Lure's position. But of course, regarding this incident, he also intended to portray Charlotte only as a victim trapped in his evil plan. However, with that intention, all the soldiers who didn't get the information, they would swear loyalty to Lure. Charlotte then remembered the soldiers supporting Lure. This wasn't new to her. Alfred always acted as Lure's shadow. Not just him. To make the royal family's light shine brighter, Alfred had maneuvered in the shadows, utilizing his bad reputation as the cursed child. The reason he sacrificed his entire well-being for that purpose was because his love for his family exceeded everything. For Alfred, what mattered wasn't the kingdom or its citizens, but the family that embraced him and gave blessings even though he was cursed. That's why he bore that burden for his family. Makina was sure Charlotte understood the reason for the end of her engagement. However, this arrangement wasn't personal, but a blood contract between the royal family and the noble family. Breaking it based on personal feelings would greatly endanger the royal family's credibility. If Alfred hadn't stormed in and caused all that confusion, Lure wouldn't have escaped the consequences. Because, publicly, Alfred bore most of the responsibility for that commotion. Charlotte really couldn't fathom their judgment that playing the villain and sacrificing himself was the method he considered best. She understood the importance of family, but still, in her opinion, there were better ways to handle things. Makina confirmed because that's how Alfred actually felt, but there was no other way. Charlotte still disagreed with her fiancé's decision. After both fell silent, Makina then turned while admitting she felt a bit more optimistic lately. Even Alfred's engagement to Charlotte was really beyond her expectations. So, maybe something would change. In fact, Makina wanted it to change. That was her optimism. Charlotte fell silent, unable to speak, until Makina informed that they had arrived in front of Alfred's room. Upon entering, Alfred immediately apologized for involving Charlotte in his problems. The girl herself didn't mind. However, Makina immediately praised her master, who had just given them a chance to get the collar key and prove that Charlotte was innocent. It was truly amazing, as expected from her master. Even so, the situation remained bad. Now Charlotte was already involved, making Alfred decide he must not lose. He was determined to do what he could. Alfred then stood up and told the 2 girls in front of him to get ready to leave. Makina asked their destination. Alfred said he hadn't taken care of everything yet, so he planned to meet Charlotte's parents. The 2 girls immediately jolted. Charlotte's own cheeks appeared flushed. Makina welcomed it happily because Charlotte would finally become Alfred's real fiancée. Alfred told them to hurry and get ready. During the journey, Makina kept smiling happily while repeating the sentence about Alfred finally getting a fiancé, making her master feel annoyed. Now that the young man had greeted Charlotte's parents, Makina felt their engagement seemed more official, even though it had indeed been official from the beginning. Upon arriving at the Mersenne estate, precisely at Charlotte's house, Alfred got out of the carriage first. Makina, who was helping Charlotte down, said that she caught Alfred putting on a cool attitude just for her. The servant asked them to wait in the living room while serving drinks. There were several purposes for Alfred coming here. Regarding the engagement, the discussion had been done between Alfred's and Charlotte's parents, but he personally wanted to convey greetings at the very end. And before the rumors about this absurd duel spread like fire, Alfred wanted to explain himself as well. Seeing his fiancée zoning out while drinking, Charlotte scolded him, but Makina asked her not to mind the young man. Besides that, Alfred had another main purpose. Even though Alfred had just arrived to introduce himself to his future in-laws, Duke Mersenne, Merville Mersenne, then greeted and apologized for making Alfred wait. He also apologized for not being present to welcome him in while bowing respectfully. Alfred in turn apologized because he came without an appointment, so he asked him to raise his head and begged them to just act normally. Merville immediately laughed out loud, making Makina surprised. He then thanked him for the consideration of his future son-in-law. Alfred was also not someone who liked unnecessary formalities. Merville had suspected it. As usual, none of them acted according to their respective positions. Charlotte then asked about the strangeness of her father, who seemed quite familiar with Alfred. The young man admitted that every time the atmosphere in the palace felt stuffy, Merville usually protected him, and along the way, they started chatting. That happened without Charlotte's knowledge. There was a reason that Charlotte didn't know regarding considering Lure's position. Alfred asked to keep this matter secret between the two of them, but apparently they no longer needed to do that. Alfred seemed to have made up his mind to say this. His hands clenched tightly with a very serious expression. He said his visit today was to convey greetings, as Charlotte's fiancé. He also admitted he wanted to apologize. Merville knew it wasn't just that Alfred wanted to say. He said he had heard about the duel. Merville had sharp hearing, even though the duel agreement had only happened yesterday. If his future father-in-law already knew, then Alfred felt it made everything faster. As might be expected, today's meeting wasn't just small talk. Alfred then asked if he could meet the legendary jeweler. Charlotte didn't expect Alfred to ask about the jeweler, meaning the craftsman who made magic rings. In short, magic rings function as mana containers. Through these rings, they were first able to explore the realm of magic. The jeweler is someone who processes mana stones to make those rings. Isn't it an exaggeration to say that they laid the foundation that built society? The former palace jeweler from the royal workshop, commonly known as the legendary jeweler. It is said they suddenly disappeared, leaving everything in the hands of their disciples. Recently, they reappeared. Now, after communicating with the Mersenne house, Alfred realized that negotiations were underway for their potential return to the workshop. Merville also praised his future son-in-law, who was knowledgeable, even though this information was still limited to a select few, including His Majesty. He also saw Alfred had some very good subordinates under his command. Charlotte gaped, not understanding, while Makina hummed indifferently. Regarding those negotiations, Alfred asked Merville's permission to handle them. The middle-aged burly man then asked the reason. Apparently, this was regarding Alfred's preparation to fight his brother, Lure. Even with the same type of magic ring, the craftsman's skill could make a significant difference. So the legendary jeweler's work was a treasure that Alfred couldn't ignore. Merville judged his suggestion very similar to Alfred. He held his chin while confirming that indeed this matter was being handled by him, and they had the ability to change who led the negotiations. He then asked permission to speak honestly, that he couldn't place trust in Alfred. Charlotte immediately slammed the table because she was dissatisfied with that answer, making her father ask her to calm down. Charlotte then sat back down while huffing. Merville revealed that his daughter had talent, born with silver mana. She had the talent to undertake the mission of supporting the royal family. Charlotte was his precious daughter, an irreplaceable treasure. They entrusted the girl because they had full trust in the royal family. However, his trust had been betrayed and Merville couldn't hold back his doubts. His hands clenched tightly, full of anger. He had reflected on the meaning of his loyalty to this royal family. Regardless of everything that had happened, his daughter still had firm belief in Alfred. As a member of the royal family, Merville asked how the young man would respond. Alfred said that at this time, no matter how he twisted his own words, it would be difficult for him to gain Merville's trust. Also, he was the cursed child, and the words of a pathetic villain probably wouldn't affect Merville. Merville was surprised because Alfred seemed to give up, but apparently not. The young man grinned, then threw a shining ring taken from his suit pocket. It was the cross ring. Charlotte knew that this ring was an important treasure of the royal family. Alfred then asked them to consider it as the collar. Makina also panicked and protested because she never knew this information, but indeed Alfred never told anyone. Merville himself still hadn't caught what the young man's plan in front of him actually was. Alfred said, if Merville felt he betrayed Charlotte in any way, he invited his future father-in-law to do whatever he wanted with that magic ring. Especially since this was a magic ring made from high-quality magic stones with a spirit dwelling in it. He was sure Merville would find many uses for it. The middle-aged man asked if he was lying because of greed for the cross ring. However, Alfred knew Merville wouldn't do it, because he believed in his straightforward nature as Charlotte's father. Merville was then willing to handle this ring with full responsibility. Anyway, without this ring, he worried Alfred couldn't fulfill royal duties. However, the young man asked him not to worry, because he still had another trump card. Merville didn't expect his future son-in-law had also planned this. So, by taking over control from the Mersenne family, he then wanted to ask Alfred to handle the negotiations with that legendary jeweler. The young man certainly welcomed it very readily. Once again, by order of Duke Mersenne, who held the authority given to him by His Majesty the King, Alfred Berg-Leuville, as the third prince, would act as the negotiator. The young man said it earnestly while standing, then sat back down in front of Merville. Then they both laughed. All right, after finishing the formalities here, Merville then entrusted Charlotte's care to Alfred. Also, he admitted he owed an apology, because he was testing the young man to prove whether Alfred could be trusted to protect his daughter. Alfred then sighed while leaning back on the sofa and admitted he also had that suspicion. Merville was ready to accept all consequences. However, Alfred didn't need it. The undeniable truth was that Merville had been betrayed by the royal family. The middle-aged man laughed, because he had expected Alfred to say that. The young man said Merville was still as wicked as before. Alfred was then bombarded with the question of when he intended to start the negotiations. As much as possible, Alfred was determined to start it as soon as possible. He still needed to make some preparations, so it thyroid would be done tomorrow. If so, Merville invited him to stay overnight at his place, along with his wide, friendly smile. Alfred could also avoid lure by staying here. The young man was very, very grateful to Duke Mersenne, and he would happily accept the offer. Alfred would use the guest room here, while Charlotte had her own room. Makina herself was busy eating the served treats. Alfred was worried they would be in danger if they stayed here. So because Charlotte couldn't use her magic now, he assigned Makina to be his fiancée's companion tonight, just in case. The maid welcomed it enthusiastically. She invited Charlotte to have a girls' talk until morning. Alfred then reminded that Makina might be annoying, but he asked his fiancée to be patient. Charlotte laughed and asked him not to worry, because she really enjoyed chatting with Makina. Alfred also reminded that they would leave tomorrow morning, so the two girls had to rest well. Makina might be a bit silly, but she was one of Alfred's most capable subordinates. He could be at ease knowing Makina was with Charlotte, who was currently powerless. Anyway, Alfred begged for all things holy, not to say unnecessary things. His memory fell on the time Makina showed that trashy book. The day grew darker. Makina, who was already sitting on the sofa hugging a pillow, called Charlotte to invite her for a girls' talk, making the ducal daughter sit on the bed limply. Even though she might not be good at it, Charlotte promised to try her best, especially since she had always admired the tradition known as girls' talk. Charlotte had never really had close friends to share experiences with, so now she was really happy. However, as Alfred said, they had a long morning, so they shouldn't stay up late. She then decided to do it briefly and sleep early. Even though she didn't quite understand the meaning, she saw Makina looking annoyed and grumbling. Makina then invited to continue the conversation, and because Charlotte had just gotten engaged, they would start from the ducal daughter of Mersenne. However, Charlotte didn't know what was good to say in this situation, but she wanted to ask. Makina said she was ready to tell everything about Alfred's treasure collection, even where the young man hid it. Unfortunately, Charlotte was more curious about how the maid could meet Alfred, because it seemed Makina had known him for quite a while. Makina then realized she had never told her, but it wasn't a very funny story. Charlotte jumped and admitted it was just a silly question. She didn't mean to pry for information. Makina instead laughed and apologized, because she must have been a bit vague there. Even though not funny, the incident wasn't a bad memory or anything. The girl herself was confused about explaining it, but simply, Alfred was the one who found her. Makina couldn't remember anything from her past except her name. Her earliest memory was also birds chirping and flying above the building. The sound of her stomach growling and the smell of soil on the floor, where her frail body curled up. Makina didn't know where to go and had no hope of surviving, but even so, she didn't want to give up on life. Every day was a struggle to survive. The little girl had to survive by stealing food and money. Charlotte apologized for reminding her of Makina's bad memories. However, the girl boasted that she was sneakier than she looked, so she was quite good at it. But one day, she made a mistake. Makina accidentally got caught red-handed by the shop guard, and then they beat her hard. She admitted that it was indeed her fault for being a thief, but luckily she was still hungry. Even so, Charlotte couldn't accept it, because what they did to Makina was very cruel. Makina then brushed it off because if they had eaten her, the situation would have been worse. Food like that must be terrible for a girl. At that time, by chance, Alfred passed by and asked permission to buy a sack of sand while pointing to Makina's battered body sprawled out. Both the shop guard and Makina herself were immediately shocked. Without hesitation, he gave the shop guard a pile of gold coins and took Makina away. That was how Alfred got the girl. Thanks to that failure, the third prince who had a hobby of buying human sand sacks became the talk of the town. Alfred had bought a dirty orphan on the streets like that, assigned servants to bathe her with warm water, gave her food, clothes, and a bed, and then employed the girl as his maid. If others said something about Makina, Alfred explained that he brought the girl as his tool and told them to stop complaining about what he did with his personal belongings. Thanks to his view of Makina as a mere tool, in the royal palace, the girl changed from a ragged stranger to a pitiful child, whose essence was no longer human and was warmly embraced by the other servants. Charlotte was shocked because it reminded her of her suffering with Lure. When Alfred once again played the villain to protect Charlotte, it felt nostalgic. Makina took a lying position on the sofa, while Charlotte was touched because her fiancé always sacrificed himself for others. As his maid, this was already a big problem for Makina. She said Charlotte would also go through hard times. Charlotte then laughed hearing it. Makina considered her story sufficient. She then felt curious about Charlotte in return. Especially the most interesting part of girls' talk was undoubtedly romance issues. While peeking from behind the pillow with a teasing gaze, she asked Charlotte to honestly say her opinion about Alfred. Of course she was talking about interesting love, because now the two of them were already engaged. Usually, in political marriages, both parties continued the relationship without caring about their feelings. But considering Charlotte's last engagement ended badly, one might assume she would hesitate to trust another man. So, Makina was curious about the reason Charlotte decided to become Alfred's fiancée. Even though Makina also knew there were many circumstances that made this happen, but she wondered if perhaps Charlotte had considered Alfred as a man for some time. Charlotte thought for a moment before denying it and admitting she had never thought of it that way, finally regretting because Charlotte only considered Alfred as a friend. The ducal daughter then immediately explained in panic that her engagement to Lure had been arranged long ago. She herself always focused on proving her worthiness for the first prince. Charlotte saw it as a duty and never really considered romance. Even though she always admired love stories, where two people who love each other could be together. Feelings like that didn't fit her situation. Makina sighed because that statement was true. Considering Lure was the first prince, he was a true prince, and becoming his fiancée was the highest honor. She then got up from lying down again. Meanwhile, Alfred had nothing to do with the concept of political marriage, so he had the freedom to feel love. Makina laughed, while Charlotte looked dazed hearing it, then asked if there was someone the young man liked. However, instead of answering, Makina reasoned that they had chatted long enough and invited her to sleep now. Charlotte even begged not to avoid the topic. Makina firmly reminded that Alfred said they would wake up early too. Charlotte admitted she didn't mind staying a little longer. Out of curiosity, she even pressed Makina to speak. The maid then immediately hid under the blanket, making Charlotte scream cutely while pulling her blanket, because this was really unfair. Even though Makina was the one who invited her for girls' talk and said she couldn't fool her, Makina herself made sounds as if she was really asleep. Charlotte couldn't sleep like this. She sighed for Makina to properly answer her curiosity. She even shouted loudly asking who Alfred liked, so much so that the voice was heard in the living room, where Merville and Alfred were still chatting. As the night grew darker and Charlotte had fallen asleep, Makina woke up again, walked to the window, and stared at Alfred down there, who was sipping his drink. She called her master in a soft voice full of hope, her hands reaching for the glass as if touching that body. Merville recounted that the famous jeweler wanted a quiet life. Once he led a delegation of his men to visit, and he refused their meeting. It would be wiser to refrain from visiting him with any man o' knights. So he felt worried it would be difficult to escort Alfred. Not that he had authority to lead the knight order from the start, but Alfred felt his own subordinates were more than enough as guards. Merville himself admitted that actually all of Alfred's subordinates were very capable. He then informed about Mount Idowel as the jeweler's residence, and the journey there wasn't too dangerous. The middle-aged man also apologized for worrying about his only daughter. Alfred himself felt it was natural for a father's worry about his daughter, but he would accompany Charlotte, so he asked Merville to just relax. The young man sipped his drink again, but when Merville mentioned the girls who must have slept by now, Alfred immediately sneezed in front of him. Merville thought the young man caught a cold, but Alfred denied it because he instead thought his idiot maid might be up to no good again. Merville asked him not to worry. Actually, he also wanted to say thank you. He was sure Charlotte would feel safer traveling with Alfred than with any guard. Alfred said he really appreciated his future father-in-law's kind words. Charlotte had no friends her age, so as a parent, Merville was very happy to have Makina as his daughter's friend. Alfred smiled hearing it. Alfred's gaze shifted to the window, where the night had begun to pass. Because he had to wake up earlier, he intended to bid farewell to sleep, but Merville just growled. He then asked if there was something his future father-in-law was thinking about. Apparently the tall, burly man was thinking about a father's feelings when marrying off his daughter, as he felt now. That made Alfred jolt. He who had sipped his drink couldn't swallow, until his drink flowed past his lips, then stammered apologizing. Merville then expressed his curiosity about a few things, making Alfred's gaze fixed on him with hands busy wiping his mouth. He imagined family must be something very precious to Alfred. So the young man fought Lure whom he respected, all to protect Charlotte. That was what tickled his curiosity. Alfred then stood up, walked to the window. Frankly, he admitted he didn't care about the fate of this kingdom, unlike Charlotte. His hands reached the glass, his gaze fell down, but his mind remembered his childhood wandering in an event. Little Alfred became the talk of everyone. They reminded each other not to get close to him. They were also surprised because the king didn't get rid of him sooner and considered the boy already crazy. They also whispered in horror, seeing his hair color. Lure then came shouting at everyone gossiping about his brother. He told them to convey their opinions directly to the king. He emphasized that Alfred was a true noble, and their behavior was treason against the crown, but still claimed to be proud citizens of the kingdom of Louisville. He then pulled Alfred away from the crowd, because associating with people like this would only tarnish his good name. Little Alfred stared at his hand pulled by Lure. In the past, his brother Lure was a king and an inspirational figure. He never cared about hair color, eyes, or magic. He just accepted Alfred. That was why Alfred loved him. Alfred clenched his hand that was previously touching the glass and admitted he didn't care what happened to the citizens. The only people he wanted to protect were the people he personally loved. And of course, Charlotte was among them. That was why he opposed Lure. Alfred turned back, looked at Merville, and said he would defend Charlotte because he believed in protecting those close to him. Merville repeated the young man's words who admitted only protecting the people he loved, but as a prince of this country, he felt that wouldn't be enough. Alfred sighed because he was never suited for it from the start. He then immediately laughed while scratching his head as soon as Merville confirmed his words. Anyway, Merville appreciated that Alfred didn't claim to do more than he could. The young man sipped his drink again. By the way, Merville smiled while asking what Alfred liked about his daughter, if the young man was willing to answer. Alfred sprayed his drink again hearing it. He was shocked because suddenly presented with such a question. Merville then defended himself that as a parent, it was natural for him to want to know that matter. He sipped his drink in between talking. Moreover, a marriage that was purely political between two nobles didn't need to involve any romantic feelings. So, Merville asked if Alfred had any complaints about Charlotte. The young man just stayed silent while wiping his mouth again. Because he didn't get an answer either, Merville finally threatened to oppose the royal family using the crossed stone given by Alfred. The young man immediately begged not to consider a coup just because he was a loving father. Merville immediately laughed because he was just joking, while Alfred's body went limp and relieved at the same time. Alfred was more frank than he might realize, and Merville could see that he cared about his daughter. That was why he was curious, how Alfred could feel that way towards her. The young man said that Charlotte's dancing was very bad. It happened in childhood. Little Alfred called his brother in the palace and reminded that it was time to practice the dance that Lure would perform at the dance party. Lure then explained that his fiancée was still stumbling, so they needed to practice separately for now until reaching a level where they could dance together. It sounded quite troublesome, but Alfred wasn't involved in all that, so he could relax. Lure wouldn't say that, because maybe Alfred would need it someday. After that, Alfred continued in the garden swinging his sword, and now the day was afternoon. He then started feeling hungry. Regarding Lure's fiancée, He had seen her at parties, but hadn't talked to her. If reminded, Charlotte was the same age as him. He then jumped hearing someone's voice counting, then immediately peeked. Apparently Charlotte was practicing dancing. Her feet slipped and her body fell sprawled. Alfred hit again because of reflex when the little girl fell. Alfred realized it was his brother's fiancée. He guessed Charlotte had been practicing since morning until this afternoon. Even when walking, the girl fell again. It was hard to watch, but how many times had Charlotte fallen? Her wounds were covered and her dress was messy. Anyone would want to cry because of this. Alfred felt guilty saying it, but he wasn't good at that. If it were him, Alfred would cancel his dance. However, Charlotte never gave up. She kept practicing, fell, got up, and wiped tears. Alfred couldn't look away from Charlotte as she stepped awkwardly. There were many things Alfred had given up on. So, seeing Charlotte's persistent perseverance was truly inspiring. To him, the girl shone like a star. A beautiful light shining in the darkest night. He couldn't let her radiance fade. That was why on that party night, Alfred took action. So that's how it was. The young man had always cared about her since early age. Merville also asked Alfred to take care of his daughter. While in the room, when the two girls had fallen asleep, Charlotte was still questioning who Alfred liked in her sleep.